about to listen to a conversation at the precipice of reality and understanding. I am John Patrick Morgan, and this is the Gatekeepers podcast. Hi, Stewart. Welcome to Gatekeepers.
You're wonderful. Thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure and a great honor to be here.
Thank
I
you.
love the term, the gatekeepers.
Yeah, I think that term came up when I was having a session with you in London, as well as it had on a kind of psychedelic journey, and the word had been sticking with me. And when you said it was kind of like the second zinger, it was like, uh-oh, this often happens when I'm in session with you. I get a second zinger of something, and it's like, okay, it's like the tipping of the scale. And for me, I think that word's almost, I didn't even realize, but it's become kind of a word lately where people are like, are you gatekeeping this information in like a marketing context? But like, for me, the word was present as there are people in this world that are an access point to deeper wisdom. And it may be esoteric and spiritual, or it may just be material. It may be like I had a guest on recently that's hasn't been published yet, but he's a Forbes 40 under 40 in financial management. And he's a gatekeeper to that whole world of material
Mm.
abundance and finance. And sometimes
Mm.
it's of the more esoteric. And I see you, actually, I see you as a gatekeeper in to material and spiritual realms. And so you were a perfect fit for that. And this is why it's our second attempt. The first attempt didn't get recorded some months back. So thank you. I am, what the reason I reached out to you now to do this again is that I have been quite impacted by Charlie Kirk's assassination. And it comes at a time where I've really been in my own inquiry around the concepts of good and evil. And so it's kind of really hit me. I couldn't help but watch the footage of the unedited footage of the violent act, which isn't really like me. I like needed to see it, and it was horrific.
Mm.
And yeah, I mean, just reflecting on it, I'm reeling from it still, but you came to mind a number of times as the person I wanted to speak with around how do we relate to a world that has evil in it, and is evil a real thing? And it must be, but is it? And so I'm toiling with some things around that. And yeah, and I just love to hear how, if you know Charlie's being, was he for you? What did you see in him? And what does this mean? Like, how do you make sense of this? The way that you see the world and the way that you experience the world.
Big question.
It
And
is. Yeah.
I'd love to share this with you because I feel
Okay.
it's an opener. And this is a quote that I put into my book
Mm,
about the 2 years I spent with Diana, Princess of Wales. There is a sacred knighthood, a knighthood of our time, whose members do not ride through the dark of the forests of old, but instead they ride through the forests of the darkened minds.
mm,
They are armed with a spiritual armor, and an inner sun makes them radiant. Out of them shines an intense love, a healing that flows from the knowledge of mankind as a joyous collection of spiritual beings. Their honorable way creates the awesome light of inner balance, inner justice, inner conviction, and inner peace. For they know that they move with the angels.
mm,
And the reason why that comes to mind is because I feel that whatever we personally feel about Charlie and his ethics or his polemic or his righteous moral indignation about certain aspects of our being, that on some archetypal level, he was a chosen one. He was brought forth to be in our midst, to uncover the shadow.
mhm.
And wow, has he done that?
Yeah.
Did it when he was alive, and his passing seems to have stimulated it hugely in our midst. Whatever his rhetoric was,
Mm,
whatever the oratory was
mm,
about his Christian fundamentalist beliefs in attitude towards gay people, in attitude towards female pregnancy or the termination of female pregnancy through abortion, that he was actually eliciting a conversation that drew forth all of the darker aspects of our beings. And he stood valiant and courageous in the face of all of that and
Hmm.
tried to find clarity, particularly watching some of the clips of him standing in these huge university campus
Hmm.
situations where all of these dear young ones are so angry with
Yes.
their lives and so angry with the state of America or with the state of the world, or indeed projecting their vilification onto him,
Yes.
that he was actually able to stand generously and courageously in their midst and try and show them ways of being able to reinvent their thinking so that they
Right.
move victim status into victor status, or at least began to uncover some of the inappropriate or inaccurate ways of thinking that they were engaging in because they were
Hmm.
just angry, 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 angry. Angry about what? Angry about being let down
Yeah.
by by the authorities.
I think that's, thank you for sharing. It's profound. I was so drawn to watching him speak, even though I didn't have agreement with a lot of his perspectives. I found it, and listening and reflecting on what you're sharing, I found it so captivating. I think because of that, because people would bring so much anger and he would maintain listening and in kindness and respect. He would have contrary opinions, but he didn't get angry back. There was never, there was a trying to fight him and he was not fighting. He was just dancing, and I found that to be kind of mesmerizing, and and you know I think what I hear you saying, at least what I'm hearing you say, is that there's like kind of dual contribution. There's maybe the potential for the contribution of the influence towards a greater bias for his Christian fundamental ideas that he's arguing for through appeals to reason. But there's also the contribution that I feel I was drawn to was the idea that we can be kind to each other in our differences, the idea that when anger comes towards you, it doesn't need to be met with anger. I was struck by his wife's little speech that she did the other day in his office about who he was as a father,
Mm.
and just how I don't even remember the words, but I just remember, wow, of course, a woman's going to speak honest, like speak positively about her husband, but there was just something so authentic in the purity of his being in relationship to his family that I found coherent with my experience of just watching him with people in the audience
Mm.
in those speeches. What do you make of? I mean, does that am I kind of hearing what you're saying that there's a spiritual contribution of his way of being that was maybe distinct from the particular ideas that he was sharing?
Oh, fundamentally, which there always is, what
Mm,
is surface is the rhetoric.
hmm.
What is the expostulation of beliefs. But what he was trying to do, I feel, is to go into the obscurity of so many opinions that are either agreeing with one or not agreeing with one. And what he was trying to do is to hold the sword of truth and the shield of courage or of vulnerability, because he was constantly being vilified and constantly being attacked by
Mm,
invective that was just so ungracious. Bearing in mind that he actually was opening a free forum of debate to
mm,
try and find a way, to repeat what I was saying earlier, to try and find a way of producing clarity so that one could detach, feel stillness, and observe what really is going on here. So
mm,
I feel that he was fulfilling as a chosen one, whether you agree with him or not. He
mm.
was a chosen one because he has reached international reputation at the age of 31
Right.
for all of the things that he's been part of, and particularly the organization of Turning Point, which is
Hmm.
also an interesting indicator. And the fact that he's actually been taken out in the way that, for example, we've seen other prominent individuals in our history being taken out, when I say taken out, of being assassinated, means that there is a very profound lesson for us to learn about the embodiment of grace, because he always showed us grace. And the
Yeah.
vilification, the invective that's been shot at him, I would say is arising mostly out of ungraciousness. So do we take the simple fact that someone in the public eye has been assassinated or has been murdered, has reached his demise. So we all need to take a moment to feel the compassion that is within all of us inherently. It is part of our moral compass or our spiritual makeup. It's our soul speaking in relation to this very beautiful wife of his and these
Mhm.
two small children who have
Yeah.
lost their father. And that we can just feel a moment of compassion and a moment of empathy. It seems to me that what we're doing is sending ripples of hope, great waves of empathic feeling around the world to help heal the world from its interminable conflict, which are
Mm.
all about these archetypal measures that are popping up, whether we're dealing with this situation or with the archetypal role of Mr. Trump or going into what's taking place in Gaza. These are all ancient principles that are trying to, the shadow complex of all of the emotions that have been pushed down over
Mhm.
centuries
Mm.
times. They're all coming up for a point of clarity. And if we can meet them with love, if we can
Mhm.
meet them with grace and with empathy and with compassion, there is a possibility that they will no longer need to be lived out in the viciousness, in the horror, in the conflict, and in the destructive elements that we
Yes.
see happening.
Yes, and I see that, it's almost like the people who take a profound role or a leadership role in loving those things as they come up, they're exalted, but then they're also often assassinated. And it's this interesting thing where it's like, on one level, you could say that Charlie was assassinated because of his opinions on the material plane being contrary to those of whoever wanted to kill him, right? But there's another level where it's like there's an there's a great counterforce to the when there's a confrontation with our own shadow and our own shame. Like as these things start to bubble up, it becomes really uncomfortable, and it's almost like the person who stands for peace in the eyes of those who are uncomfortable facing that shadow are a greater villain than the person who holds the counterpoint to their material opinion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally, totally. We're beginning to see the contradictions that exist, that
Hmm.
he was saying one thing but being another.
Hmm.
And I keep referring to the rhetoric or the contentious nature of his dialogue, that it was designed purely and simply from his mental capacity, which was vast, having met him, this savant intelligence, where he could take a principle and argue it through so many different, or debate it rather, through
Hmm.
so many different vistas of thought to bring us all to a point of clarity. Now, this is why I refer to there's something supernatural going on here.
Yes,
There's
tell me.
something archetypal going on here, which is a measurement of what our potential could be, what our infinite potential could be, if we can only move into a grace, a state of empathy. And then we no longer need the horror of the conflict to understand who we are rather than what we are, because the opinionation is just a pixelation of ideas that are being
Mm.
sent forth, that we're trying to find out fundamentally, well, who are we at this time of our gestation as human beings on this planet? Who are we rather than what are we?
Hmm.
Do we represent this party or that party? Are we left or right? Or are we gay? Are we straight? Or this is
Hmm.
all what we are rather than who we are. And
Yeah.
that's why this quote is very interesting, that you have someone like this who walks with angels. And so the angels, as Abraham Lincoln said, of our better nature, or the
Hmm.
angels of our worser nature. I personally do not believe in evil. Know that there is a force in our world that is dark, can exist if we create it to be so. But that fundamentally, at core, we are beings of great love, and we are beings of great joy, we are beings of great hope, and we are beings of great grace. This is how we experience the innocence of the child. And that child is still within us, even though we've grown, and you see a man sitting here who's in his early 70s, so looking good on it, I'm told.
Very much
But
so.
the child is still here within me. But it's not that we move into the indolence or the recklessness of what the inner child is all about, that we move straight into the innocence and the joy of what the child can bring forth as an original statement of human life on planet Earth. So we haven't seen the end of this eruption of horrors that have taken place as a result of Charlie's assassination. Something else will happen within the social systems of our planet. Obviously, all of them are up for grabs at the moment. All of them are being redefined
Mm.
because, as we know, that the hierarchical situation of the patriarchy is no longer serving the quickly moving tide of what our creative processes are all about at this time. And people want to claim their sovereignty, which is
Mm.
ironic. We think about the absolute ethic and the essence of what the great republic of the United States of America is all about. But at the same time, we can actually see that there is great confusion about what the United States is all about. And so, who is the United States? What is the collective experience of the United States, which could become a leading premise within the resurrection of goodness in our world?
Yeah, I don't even know. I mean, I've been back in the US 10 years now. As you know, I was abroad for 10 years, and it feels like a very different country than when I left in 2000, January 2006, in the sense of it doesn't feel like a country as much as it used to. It feels like, two parties arguing essentially. That's when I'm plugged into the political narrative. You know what? I shouldn't say that. I wanted to say what a lot of us say, which is like on the day to day when you're just in your community and stuff, there's not polarization, but it's not even true because this political conversation has made its ways into the places where we do commune, into the school systems, into the way that restaurants are run, into the government. Like it's trickled down. It's not just something that's on the news anymore. It actually does live in our society. I have friends that can't be friends with other friends because of the way that this has become so present. So it is affecting us on a local and community level. And so that's just different, right? They used to
Mm,
be like, we are Americans or we're United States citizens. And then that was at least the thing we had in common. In fact, I did a talk when I was in London years ago for a TEDx talk on how to create a borderless world. And my suggestion at the time is kind of like, well, that was maybe it didn't work out the way I thought it would, but it was like, because borders are dissolving in so many ways that they're going to continue to disappear, right? But I was just like, the only thing that really isn't allowed to cross a border now is a human body. Our ideas cross, our money cross, and so I just saw this dissolving of borders, and I saw, this the emergence of a common identity as just a human being in the world.
mm,
I didn't have the foresight to see that there was a pendulum swing, and that we were actually, going to be moving more towards separation. But
mm,
so yeah, it's different being here now, and I don't even know that people are asking the question, "Who are we?" At least not consciously. In America, anyway, most of the people are saying, "This is who I am," and that needs to go away. Whether
mm,
it's Hamas or Palestine or Democrats or Republicans or far left or far right, whatever it is, the other needs to leave. I know
mm,
a friend of mine that I was talking with this morning was talking about a friend of his in New York, and she's been very vocal about her left-leaning views, and and she said that when Trump got elected, that means there's 150 million people in America she wishes were dead. I mean, that's like, this is a conscious woman who leads a company and has thousands of people that follow her, and just, I mean, that the depth of, I mean, I want to go into you don't believe evil is real unless we create it, but like maybe we'd call it the darkness. This like the darkness. It's the same kind of darkness that created Nazi Germany. Like, but a
mm.
person in that darkness would never ever be able to say like, "Oh, I'm like the Nazis," but because that's different somehow, some way. Does the darkness just obscure us from the wisdom of our love? Is that what's
Well,
happening?
that's the point, you see, because really
Yeah.
what I believe that what we're talking about in very, very bold, broad brushstrokes is the fact that the shadow is emerging. And the shadow is emerging because it needs to be healed, the shadow of
Mm,
the unconscious. All of the pain, all of the trauma, all of the soul indentations that have been maligned over these lifetimes that we're living and possibly prior lifetimes. In terms of the life of our societies or our cultures, there is a history which is emerging. For example, it isn't by default that we see so many people against the nature of our past societies and
mm.
how the individuals who were very influential in the creation of those past societies are now being maligned to the point where they're being almost destroyed, even though many of them, such as Benjamin Franklin, for example, created great goodness. He was also
Yeah.
a slave owner. And
Mhm.
so we're just seeing that aspect of the darkness, of the shadow, that is rather than the great achievement. So it's a perfect indication that a society is really moving through its own trauma to uncover what the shadow is all about.
Mm,
And I feel that you
mm,
see that wherever Charlie's shadow was, that he was able to step forward in the quagmire, admit his humility,
mm.
admit innocence, and at the same time face it in the way that a spiritual warrior faces the darkness.
Yeah, where does that power of humility come from? Because I'm doing a lot of shadow work myself right now, and I understand and have experienced that having the humility to acknowledge the darkness within me is what gives it the space to emerge so that it becomes into awareness, first of all, and then continuing to be humble to it and to not judge myself for it or resist it allows me to be with it. And at which point it begins to let me be. And so, you know, not at all on the scale of what Charlie is or was doing, but like we're I guess this is my inquiry is like when people have great humility, is it because they have contact with, a connection with something greater than them? Call it God or spirit or what? What humbles a person to be able to meet the shadow with equanimity that way?
Because they have the experience of wonder and the experience of
Mm,
awe, that
mm,
they believe in a power that is much greater than they, but they are also part of that power. And that
mm,
was the testament that I feel someone like Charlie brought forth. Faith was the guiding tenet that he lived by. So he believed utterly in the word of Christ. He believed
mhm,
utterly in the varying precepts or tenets of the experience of what that life was all about, deduced from the New Testament. He
mm,
believed fundamentally in faith,
mm,
belief, and
mhm,
trust.
mm,
But actually, when you measure them in the human context, they are the three concomitants of love. If we love, we believe. If we love, we have faith. If we love, we trust. We know
mhm,
this because our hearts can be broken when we fall
mm,
out of excuse me, or when our lovers suddenly disappear, that
mhm,
we move through a terrible, horrific, long, dark night of the soul, where all of our
mm.
beliefs, all of our faith, and all of our trust is suspended. Can
Yeah.
we heal from that? Of course. Of course we can heal, but it takes time. Firstly, we have to grieve those parts that have been held in shadow or in darkness
Mm,
and use the great device of alchemy to recognize that nothing is singular, everything is plural. So wherever the darkness lies, there is also the light. And then eventually we renegotiate ourselves and the fiber of our hearts, the cellular constitution of our hearts begins to repair because we move back into consistency and cease the chaos. That's what faith does. That's what belief does. It gives us the energy to keep going. And the
mhm.
secret is very simple. The secret of that is the main thing is to keep the main thing, and then it changes.
Say that again. The secret is to keep the main thing the main thing.
The main thing is to keep the main thing, and then it changes because it produces this elasticity of consistency. And what's interesting for me as a voice coach is that when I experience this with the people that I work with who are experiencing sometimes fundamental disempowerments with their voice. As soon as they start feeling the breath working on a really elongated rhythm of extended energy, that
Hmm.
all these vital quotients fall in and they
Hmm.
begin to see the light. This is what is meant by changing the whole of our circumstances through inspiration
Hmm.
rather than being caught in desperation. But
Hmm.
sometimes to find the inspiration, we need to go into desperation so that we can recalculate, recalibrate, and reform
Right.
the whole of our being into who we are. And that's when we start believing in resurrection. And of course,
Mm.
that's what Charlie was doing. He believed in the resurrection of all of the essence that Jesus lived and
Right.
was by
Right.
nature, by all
Right.
of his training, by all of his intelligence, that he was actually an emanation of a much, much stronger, brighter force,
Mm.
which was a universal servant.
Wow. Yeah.
So there are very big questions that are being asked, you see, of what do I believe in? I firmly believe in the universe. I see the universe as an act of great wonder and great awe. We know
Hmm.
that scientists, and particularly our quantum physicists and our astrophysicists, can go deep into the formulaic understanding of how it's formed. But there is another presence which is mysterious within the whole substance of the universe. And we're beginning to understand that it's completely self-organizing and completely self-correcting. When we move into drama, we beat ourselves up rather
Right.
than, you know, it's like the universe is providing us with a perfect GPS. And like any good GPS, that when we haven't taken the turning that we needed to take, the
Mm.
GPS simply says recalibrating, recalibrating. Would you please turn left at the next turning? Then we go on and we miss the next turning and it says recalibrating, recalibrating. Would you please turn left at the next turning? Or please, would you do a U-turn? What we do is we immolate ourselves in the fact that we fucked up or that we've made a mistake. So
Right.
we bitch ourselves and demand all sorts
Yeah.
of ransom from ourselves rather than I made a mistake.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I literally can remember being frustrated that I missed the turn and then not being paying enough attention to the GPS to when it offered me the next turn to turn around, and then I'm missing that. And it's like literally on that practical level. It's actually I can relate to that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So all of those integers, all of those aspects of our shadow are being exhumed.
Yeah, on a
That's
collective level. Right.
the
Right.
horror
Right.
on the world stage. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Because I firmly believe that this is a screen for our consciousness. It's not happening to us, it's responding to us.
So in the same way that when you're doing your own individual shadow work with your own individual shadow, and you must have an attitude of welcoming that which you have been resisting and being humbled before it and allowing yourself to acknowledge that it's a part of you. Would the correlation to that be that, like, on the cultural, social, collective level, we must have equanimity with the emergence of this polarization and the darkness we see playing out in this like material plane, like, and essentially more pragmatically, to not get angry and to want to fight back when somebody is assassinated, is which sounds kind of like that's not like the common narrative. Like the narrative is we want to now fight back, and it's like, but I get that, but I also, I mean, one of my favorite stories is the story of Mahatma Gandhi, and it's like that kind of radical unwillingness to meet violence with violence. Even on an emotional level, like to be able to just like, what would Charlie do if Charlie saw Charlie was assassinated, right? Would he, okay, now I got it. Now I'll be angry. Now I'll fight. Or would it still be the same mode of like, let's have a calm conversation about why this is not maybe the best way forward, you know?
Well, he really represented, as indeed did that great human saint who was martyred, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He really lived, be the change you want to see. It's that
Yes.
simple.
Yeah.
Going back to something you just said, which was immensely revelatory, what happens is that we react. we don't respond. So, in other words, we react an action that we've always acted before,
Right.
which is held in shadow, it's held in pain, it's held in sorrow, profound sorrow, it's held in,
Hmm.
rather than detach, feel stillness, observe. Wait a minute, how do I respond in a completely unique, highly creative, wholesome way that
Hmm.
brings about change in all of the people that sit before me or stand before me, that brings about the greatest light, the greatest joy, the greatest freedom, the greatest adventure, the greatest belief in themselves as beings
Yeah.
of infinite potential. But we
Yeah.
react because essentially we're really, really angry, as
Sure.
we see with so many of our young people. And that's only because when we were little and we got angry, we were told to put it away. Who do you think you are?
Yeah.
So
Right.
suddenly there's a supremacy from the hegemony of our lives, meaning our mum and our dad or our teachers, and we suppress the ill
Hmm.
feeling and we don't realize that we've done it.
We
And
suppress
now
the
what?
anger
We
and then we get
suppress
more
the
angry.
anger and the
Yeah.
fear that is underneath the anger.
Right. And it just festers and grows and it comes out again sideways and part it adds to the collective. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, being a father has really helped me to learn to be with emotion and anger, especially in a way that is kinder and more effective. Like the problem with anger is that it works to get the outcome that anger wants in the short term,
Mm,
oftentimes. Like you can
mm,
stop somebody from doing the thing you don't want to do through being angry. The problem
mm,
with that, with its efficacy, is it just continues the chain, right?
mm,
And so with my boys, I mean, if they're getting crazy and yelling and doing stuff and throwing things or whatever, and I get angry with them, the problem is they'll stop for that moment. But there's a learning about it's like we meet intensity with higher intensity. And actually, I was reading the Tao once. This is when my son was two. And there was something in the Tao, I forget what chapter it was, about how you're meeting high intensity with low intensity as a
mm,
way to overcome the high intensity. Because my son had been biting, like at school, and we gave him a little rubber Lego to bite on, but he would still bite people. And when we asked him, he said, "I'm biting them because I love them." So, but it still wasn't a helpful expression, right? And so I had been saying to him, stop biting, like kind of like trying to be more intense. I actually even followed the advice of somebody said, bite him back. And it didn't work. He just bit me harder. But then once I read that thing in the Tao and he bit me, I laid down on the floor and I let him keep biting me. And I said, gentle, gentle, easy, easy. And then he relaxed. It wasn't
mm,
easy for me to do that because inside I was doing, no, biting is wrong. My kid's the biting kid. It's preschool. We're going to get kicked out. Like whole story narrative, right? But
mm,
because I was able to do that with him, he started to stop.
mm,
And
mm,
that became a practice. And then the really interesting thing with that is that one day I was walking into the kitchen, my son was nowhere around, and I heard those words in my head, gentle, gentle, easy, easy. And I was like, why did I just say that? And I tracked back and I realized, oh, I'm walking into the kitchen to get a cookie or something out of the fridge while I'm on this cleanse. And I judged myself for giving up on the cleanse and getting a cookie. And then I responded automatically with a lower intensity.
right,
And
right.
that's when I really started to understand that the way that we be with ourselves is the way we be with the world and vice versa.
Mm,
And so, I am doing my best. Part of reaching out to you is like, let me be in the practice of not being angry,
mm,
seeking understanding. Because the most important thing right now is that I don't add to this fire of discontent and division through
mm,
anything I say or be.
mm.
Yeah. So thank you for helping me to contribute to that.
You see, that's absolutely brilliant because through the story you give us so many details of why was he biting, and so
Yeah.
we know biting because this was the way that he loved.
Yeah.
And so, I
Great
immediately,
point.
as an empath, I feel my own inner child biting, realizing that what I was trying to do is to eat the love,
Yes.
bite things, and then we masticate them, then we swallow them, and we become
Right.
that.
I think
And of
so.
course, what you were doing is showing him through gentleness, you were showing him what his capacity was to
Hmm.
experience not something that could be socially ambivalent, but something that could be socially gracious and something
Mhm.
be and a greater understanding of his own wonderful burgeoning intelligence. So we're given room for capacity. The difficulty with so much of our socialization process, or indeed our educational process, is that those tendencies have actually not been fully understood
Mm.
and been suppressed. And as a result, they build up and build up and build up and build up, and we get very, very angry
Mhm.
and then start to eructate all over the
Yes.
place. And that's what war is all about, isn't it? It's just
Yes.
unintelligent anger.
Yeah, it's you're
And
wrong for biting, you're wrong for wanting to bite, you're just wrong for being. And
yeah,
then it's like just wants to erupt. Yeah.
and many of the great spiritual teachers, many of the great prophets have shown us what the capacity of anger can be used for, not as a device to project onto somebody else and thereby create great harm or great ill within them, but that anger can be used to state something from a self-righteous point of view. I will not allow this to happen. For example, we see in the Synoptic Gospels, we see Jesus go into the synagogue and see
Yes.
his father's house, the synagogue, being
Hmm.
used by the tax collectors and the money changers. And it says that he overturned the tables and gave a great
Hmm.
shout. I think it's in Luke, he says he picked up a whip. It doesn't say he hit anybody, but I imagine Indiana Jones style, he gave the air a
Right.
great crack, which is appropriate to say cease. So it's a self-righteous way of creating a boundary, a border, but to
Hmm.
hold the capacity of the energy to see where's this going to go with all of
Yeah,
these people present, you know?
sure.
So it's a supernatural aid that brings us in. And that if we can just use that principle, as you were saying, gentle, gentle, easy, easy. Thank you for reminding me, because at the moment I find myself getting riled up
Really
very
angry. Yeah, yeah.
easily. Uh, because I have a charmed life, I have a charmed
Hmm.
life living in the world that I've created,
Hmm.
and wonderful people come to that world with me. And then over the last few months, 5 months, I needed to find somewhere new to live. And so I came down from my Eagle's Eyrie into and started dealing with all of the people that I needed to deal with in the form of real estate agents and so forth and
Hmm.
so forth. I realized that much of that situation is essentially very corrupt. And so
Yes.
my role as a peace bringer, as a grace exponent, was to inform them of what I perceived was taking place, but to do it gently and
Hmm.
easily. It developed into huge
Hmm.
conversations where their ways were changed.
Hmm.
They rued the day of the manipulation that was taking place, which was
Yeah.
all over money, greed, greed, greed over money. So I tried to have open conversations with everybody in the way that we began our
Yes.
conversation about Charlie. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. I feel
Exactly.
we just need to keep going. But I do know that it cost me energy
To do
because
that.
I needed to move into a yang force that
Yeah.
was really strong. And that cost me a lot of energy. And now what I'm doing is I'm repairing my neurological system and moving back into the charmed nature of my life, which is not some hairy, fairy, absurd situation. It's very real, but it allows me to go into some of the really challenged areas of the world, like Gaza, run workshops for
Mm-hmm.
UN workers, people that have been in that situation really since October the 8th, 2023,
Yes.
post, post the awful day of genocide that took
Hmm.
place, and help those people find ways of releasing the trauma of what it is to work in a war zone and to
Hmm.
deal with the mutilated bodies of people that they're dragging from underneath rubble
Yeah.
uh, and therefore experiencing rare degrees of PTSD and war
Hmm.
trauma, and not
Hmm.
realizing how to cope with it from a physiological point of view. And as a
Hmm.
result, for example, one of the common elements within war becoming constantly constipated.
Yeah.
Because producing so much adrenaline in that situation that the intestinal tract is affected by the
Really?
adrenaline.
Oh, literally constipated, not metaphoric or spiritually.
No,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
literally,
Both.
literally,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
physiologically, but both, because we're holistic. So whatever
Hmm.
happens in our physiology happens
Right.
in the subtle energy of our bodies.
Yeah.
What it
So
indicates is that there's a lack of flow.
I'm just curious on the impact of that work, what that impact has on you in comparison with talking with the real estate people, like is it draining as well in the same way, more or less? Is it different?
Less so.
Less so. Yeah, tell me
Less
why.
so.
I was curious.
Because there's a game that is played within the money markets and the property
Hmm.
markets. And the game is, how much money do you have? And if you
Hmm.
have a lot of money, it
Hmm.
proves your whatness. It proves your status in the world. And if you're working through a figure that they don't agree to because they want you to spend more money, but you stay where you are in the bracket that you
Hmm.
are, then insults arise, where
Hmm.
all sorts of nefarious means are used
Right.
to try to
Right.
extract more money from you. And so I found that my status was constantly being evoked in the most bizarre
Mm.
way that I felt was an infringement of my civil liberties. And I said that on a number of
Right.
occasions. Whereas if I move into the trauma of a war zone, they're in a completely different capacity
Right.
where my whatness, my status, is already assumed as
Hmm.
being considerable. Otherwise, why would I
Hmm.
be? So I have a
Hmm.
track record, a series of experiences that have led me to a field of expertise, or in their eyes, a prestige,
Hmm.
where belief, faith, and trust emerge.
Hmm.
And that gives
Wow.
me the opportunity then to move into a deeper conversation,
Right.
one that is consequential, and therefore of operating as a healer or transformer.
So it's this status game that's really energy draining. What's so interesting, I don't know if you know that my background, my first industry that I worked in out of university was real estate. And I worked in there for a few years when the market was going up. I made a bunch of money, but ultimately I just left that industry in large part because of the corruptness, and there's just people were just stabbing each other in the back and the infidelity, and it was just like, and of course there are people that aren't that way, but there was a lot of it, and I was like, that's not the world I wanted to live in, and so I kind of left it, and I just rented for almost 20 years until I moved here to Maui and bought the home here, and when I did, it's real interesting. I brought all the work and all the kinds of ideas that we're talking about to, well, just in my being, right? And then as this thing was going on, this real estate deal, I just did it so differently than people typically do it because I'm not coming from, you're supposed to do it this way. And both realtors said to me, we've never seen a transaction like this. The things that the seller is agreeing to and the rapport that you guys have, and you know, everybody in the deal, both all the agents, the mortgage broker, the seller, the buyer, everybody was happy. Everybody got exactly everything that they wanted. And I think that that's the result of at least one person in the game having the attitude that that's possible and being committed to it, being a
Mm.
stand for it, and not being triggered when somebody has an opinion to the contrary. So it brings this kind of gentle, easy practice into, more than your kid biting, but like how you be in the world, how you do business, how you help people maybe heal in trauma, but like certainly anywhere where there's somebody's going to project onto you some kind of game and expect you to play it. And if you say no, oh, that's the other thing about the anger. Like if you have the courage and the willingness to be angry, I think that's also important and powerful. Like as I've gotten more gentle with myself, I've I've had a new relationship to anger where it's something I can wield, but I'm holding it. It's not holding me.
Mm.
And I might raise my voice, but it's like I don't feel I'm on a runaway train. It's something that
Mm.
just barrels through me, and it's like I'm using it and it has an impact and an effect. And so in that same sense, when people are trying to put a game onto me or pull me into a status game, that same capacity for anger, even though I might not be raising my voice, is what gives me the ability to stand there and not go into it, and to maintain that gentleness. It's kind of like because I'm willing to be angry and express anger, I can stay calm and say gentle, easy. It's kind of
Mm.
paradoxical.
Hence my quote at the very beginning.
Which part of
So
it?
I believe that you're describing the role of the sacred warrior.
Okay. Yeah.
Today we call the change bringer, the change maker.
Yeah.
And so there's a reflection on the nature of the chosen one who
Hmm.
comes forth to bring this element, you know. And we have an old conversation, you and I, where we've talked about the warrior and the priest or the
Hmm.
priestess, the
Hmm.
warrioress and the priestess. If they can live mutually and co-creatively within us, then one feeds the other and the other feeds the other. It's very simple. So,
Yeah.
the great samurai warriors. It's true they look terrifying in all of that armor with that huge sword, but they would stand in face of their opponent and measure their opponent, and they
Hmm.
would develop all senses, including the sixth sense, to be able to read the opponent.
Mm.
And in reading someone, when someone tells you their truth, believe them, whether it's dark or light.
Right.
So in reading them, you can discover their note, because we each have a frequency which is the signature note of our
Hmm.
beings. And the samurai would make that note to that individual, and the individual would collapse before them. So they wouldn't need to use the sword.
So they would speak to them with using that note, and that
Sound
frequency
the
would. Right. Oh,
you know,
wow. Okay. Yeah.
sound the note. And automatically they would be disempowered because they were
Mm.
not living their note, do you see?
Right. Right.
So they would perceive it as disharmony. The
Because it would
body
be,
would
yeah.
collapse, and then they would recover and discover what their harmony was.
Well, that takes me into my other realm of curiosity and relationship to this whole conversation and knowing your work. Like, if for for those listening, they may not know the work that you do with voice and helping people to find their signature note so that they can communicate and be in the world in a way that has greater impact and influence. And from you know all the household name actors and actresses and singers and also political leaders and people that are some of the most powerful people in our world, their voice and their capacity to press that voice in the world, from Margaret Thatcher until today, have learned how to do that more effectively through working with you. Okay. What therefore you have been a part of for decades is this realm of power where darkness and light, the game of darkness and light has been being played out. And so my curiosity is in, like, what role do you feel that you are playing in helping powerful people who are navigating the darkness and the light to find their signature note and to have impact and influence in the world? I mean, because I know this isn't what you're doing, but on a very kind of simple level, you might think, oh, he helps people be more influential. But what if they're a person who's, shrouded in darkness and now they're just more influential? My guess is that with what you're doing, it's not just making them more influential. There's some bigger picture to it. But I'm kind of assuming a lot here. But yeah, what lands and what do you? Where am I crazy? And where is there something that's been part of your mission and your work?
Bless you. Well, you're depth charging, aren't you, through asking a number of
Yeah,
questions.
I am.
Keeps this going. So,
Right.
fundamentally, right at the very core of what I do is to remind people of who they truly are rather
Yeah.
than what they become. And what they have become is tense. What they have become is secretly fearful. What they have become is denying the power of their extraordinary potential. And so I listen. I always remember, when I had the extraordinary honor to coach Margaret Thatcher. And I was in my early 30s, so I was a greenhorn. I'd been an actor for 10 years, but opportunities that came to me were really the wheel of fortune going plonk and suddenly lifted me up. It's true contextually that as a child, I was surrounded by great people because my father worked for the British royal family. The interesting thing was that I was made to feel that I was nothing,
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't fit in to the educational context. I was a whimsical child that was
Mm-hmm.
constantly talking about what I was seeing, which was supernatural. Of course, this was denied me, and they thought that I was mad. The difficulty was that I didn't fit in because I didn't fit into the educational model because I'm profoundly dyslexic. And I would have synesthesia, which is this crossover the senses. It wasn't fully understood at school, but basically what it meant, I couldn't read. I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
read before the age of 12 or 13 when suddenly something shifted. However,
Mm-hmm.
so there I was preparing to go and meet Margaret Thatcher in 10 Downing Street. She was this was 1980, 81. So she'd been the premier for about a year. And I remember saying to my partner at that time, "But what am I going to say? What am I going to say? What am I going to say?" And he said to me, "Why don't you just listen?" A huge light went on. So, of course, I put my own self-consciousness aside, my nervousness aside, and went in and smiled and was gracious. And of course, I looked good. I was wearing a good suit. But I actually just simply said, "What may I do for you?" And she started speaking. And of course, that gave me the possibility, the opportunity rather, to see all the possibilities that existed in where she was feeling weak or insecure, or where she hadn't quite grasped an appropriation that could be useful to her as a
Mm-hmm.
skill. And one of the things that was happening with Margaret is she was just living in her intellect. So her voice was sort of up here in this sort of slightly pseudo upper middle class sound, which is something that she'd learned at Oxford because she was a Lincolnshire lass. Her
Mm-hmm.
father was a town councillor. So she was brought up in a very, very earthy way, but through her intellect and her intellectual prowess, had gained this status in Oxford. And then you had to sound in a certain way to be accessible for polite society. So she sort of learned this thing. And I realized that what I needed to do was to ground her and to give her weight. And so we started working on that. But I listened to her for about half an hour. And then we began discussing, well, I feel that this is what we could do.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the session, she said to me, "Before you go, I want to thank you." And I said, "Well, that's very gracious of you. In what way?" "Actually, more than that, I want to congratulate you because most people talk at me and
Mm-hmm.
you listened to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I really thank you for that because you calmed me."
Mm-hmm.
And now we can see the parameters. Where do we start? Very easy, very accessible. It's true that she had another side of her that she could be extremely difficult, hence she was called the Iron Lady by the Russians. Anyway, so through those experiences, we learn how to temper. So at the core, to answer your question, I remind people of who they are rather than what they, and that begins an extraordinary conversation that leads them into the possibility of exploring all sorts of different broader aspects of their parameter than they
Mm-hmm.
perhaps have first conceived. Because we all know that when we're in positions of power and positions of responsibility, we can often become tunnel vision.
Yes. Yeah, we just put our kids in a new school called the Acton Academy, which is named, it's a fairly new school, 15 years. They've been growing rapidly, but it's named after Lord Acton, inspired by his philosophy, the famous quote, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I remember bringing that up with you at dinner a couple of years ago, and I asked you, do you believe that? And you said, well, power that's based on fear does, but not power that's based on love. And so I guess that this is like an ongoing inquiry into that, right? Like when you are helping people that have massive power and impact in the world to come to know who they are, is for you, is that helping them return to love and trusting that whatever power they have and whatever influence they have, it is going to move more in the direction of love, whatever that material or mimetic version of that is, but like on a spiritual level, because I imagine this work is spiritual for you. It's not, you're not just helping people to be more powerful with their voice. It has never been just about that, I don't think.
Well, it's holistic. It's
Mm,
about the entire being because that's how powerful our voices are. With the physical means that we use to express the way we think and the way we feel. It's
hmm
that, but so therefore they're very atavistic. Our
mm,
voices are very primal. The difficulty is that we have moved into the alluring beliefs that our thoughts are the captains of our lives, and feeling is the language of the soul.
mm.
So, of course, when somebody is really, really tense, then what generally speaking happens is that there's a great deal of upper story tension in their bodies and their shoulders, in their throats, and as a result of that, the back of the tongue. I mean, now that's the sound that we hear so much in the United States of America. Everybody's here and talking 50 miles an hour. I'll change it. So what's happening is that the individual is not breathing. And what I do is I open up the arena of interest or curiosity or wonder of, do you realize that when we breathe, people breathe with us or they don't breathe with us? So for
Right.
example, if we take, the mother and her babe, that if the babe is bawling, if mother breathes into the babe begins to breathe with mother. So this is the space where love is made. Empathically, through sympathetic magic, we become part of the same resonance. So
We
what
do.
I've done for years is to coach individuals, sometimes lure them into understanding how they can draw 1,000 people into the one breath, and
Mm,
it's their breath.
hmm
So we need to work on the physiology of the way that breath works and how it opens up the whole of the vocal position, the vocal carriage, and the vocal personality.
Mm,
And it's magical. It's called entrainment.
yeah. You mean the entrainment is when you're drawing everybody into the same breath?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
watch it
yeah.
in performers. It's like years
Sure.
and years ago, going to a Tina Turner concert and watch her hold 25,000
Right.
people in the palm of her hand. I had the joy of meeting her afterwards because I happened to be there with her manager and his wife, who was a client of mine. And when we when we met, in walked Queen, because Tina was something. Wow, an
Mm,
empress, this huge energy field. And I was introduced to her. She was absolutely charming. And I said, I need you to know that I thought you were absolutely extraordinary, and I want to know how you hold 25,000 people in the palm of your hand. And she said, well, you're cute, so come over here and let's talk. So we went over to the corner of her salon, in which she was staying in this wonderful hotel in London. And I said, how do you do it? And she said, well, firstly, I stand backstage and I look through the spy hole. So the audience can't see the performers, but the performers can see the audience. And I go through the whole of the audience when the prior group is
mm,
warming up the audience, saying, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you.
mm,
Love you, I love you, I love you. So she said, when I go out there, this is a space where love is made. This is not
hmm
about making love. It's about this is a space where love is made. Then I
hmm
breathe. And when I breathe, as I move and I sing, they breathe with me. And so we
mm.
all come together in this is a space where love is made. It
That's
helped
so
having
cool.
the tunes that she had, of course,
Yeah,
the
yeah, of
melody,
course.
and the extraordinary expertise of her movement with her girls on stage.
But all of it comes from that same connection to source and to love and to that intention. I mean, I'm no Tina Turner, but it's just awesome to hear that because when I do public talks, a couple hundred people in the room, I stand at the back of the room. There's no peephole for me to look through. And I just, nobody even knows who I am yet, but I, the way I say it is I try to break my heart for everybody. So I look at them as they're sitting down and I just use my imagination to imagine like, what are they struggling? What are they going through? And for me, like touching a little piece of sadness, like really turns my heart on. And so then by the time I walk up on that stage, I can just walk out and look out of the room, like heartbroken in a good way with love for everybody. And then whatever unfolds from that, what I talk about is like secondary to kind of being a channel for that. And I don't know if there's an entrainment happening, but I certainly love it. We've shared the stage. I love that experience. You felt the room that you've walked into when I've had an audience in the room.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But again, you see, it's be the change you want to see, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're endorsing the whole of your physiology, all of your sensuality, all of your
Right.
sensory nature, and fake it to make it. You're creating it before you've actually
Yeah.
moved it. Then, as soon as you move there, all we have to do is keep endorsing it, and then we have the most wonderful time. I mean, I know, having done so many keynotes for corporate identities, sometimes thousands of people, that if I'm not in joy mode, it's
Mm,
always they don't like me. But
mm.
if I'm in joy mode, we have fun. So I think
Yeah.
myself into joy mode because, like everybody, even though I've done it several times, that you always move into it feeling nervous. And then it's a question of, well, how do I ground me in the
Yeah.
reality of this substance? And when I think about all of the speeches, presentations that I've given, I've only died twice, which is pretty good.
You've only
Died,
died twice?
that's a
Oh,
theatrical
like,
part,
okay, right.
meaning that I've literally died on stage, meaning it has not been effective. And they've loathed me.
Yeah, they
In-
loathe you for it, right? Like they're really angry at you in a way because isn't that interesting? Because you are up on the stage and you have let us down. All of us have been let down by the one you. And so how dare you in some way? And I
well,
think that, what?
they didn't feel that I liked them, you see.
Because you weren't enjoying it. Yeah, that makes sense. They just took it personally. They took it personally, as we do. Yeah. The other thing I
And I
wanted to
think
ask, go ahead.
one of these companies, from a very ironic point of view, but it sheds light, which is why I mention it. One of these companies was British Telecom,
Okay.
which is based on international global communications.
Yeah.
And what I discovered is so often when I first started working the corporate market, which is now, I suppose, 40 years ago, I realized that even in the most keen, most innovative, most dreamy HR situation,
Mhm.
that often the situation was not based on equalized co-creative communication. That's no judgment, by the way, it's just an
Mhm.
observation. I realized how I could better the situation in all of the situations that I met after that, where I was dealing with communication teams. But of course, this takes courage.
Yes.
And that's what Charlie had in spades.
Yes.
And Aristotle said that courage is a virtue. It's sustainability, isn't it? There's a wonderful
Hmm.
line in Shakespeare in the Scottish play which says, screw your courage to the sticking place and we'll not. So it's the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. You see, the courage is a concomitant with belief, faith, and trust. That you have the courage that you believe in this entity that you wish to create. You believe in the liveliness of the commodity because you believe fundamentally that it's going to bring about the greatest good for the people before you or with you. And you just keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess this is what I wanted the courage is something I was going to bring up too, because, you know, in the wake of Charlie's assassination, I felt scared in my own very, very small way to have just even the voice that I have and to take a stand for the things that I stand for standing for peace, right? To just even to even say something or write something about the situation that stands for peace, hopefully in something transcendent of the polarity, and then to be eviscerated for it. It was a scary, scary thought. And yet his sacrifice also makes that the hesitancy to be a stand. I'm humbled by that. Like it kind of, I don't want to create some kind of judgment on myself for not having more courage, but it kind of like, it also is it's both scary and encouraging. It adds courage. It gives me courage because I've kind of meet that fear with like, well, his life is not honored if I'm going to pull back from even having a conversation that might
Mm.
upset people, especially with the understanding that there's a certain amount of upset that must occur for the shadow to come into awareness and for us to move through this, right? It's not my intention or desire for people to be upset, but I do. want us to move in the direction of greater peace and love. And so I am finding a deeper courage. In fact, in my journaling, kind of free writing a couple mornings ago, I just saw, like, I've been paragliding recently, which is like where you run off a mountain with a deployed parachute wing and then you fly, and so it's amazing and incredible. And it's not it's not without its risks, put it that way, right? And so on some level, I'm putting my life on the line to have this fun experience. And the thought just came to me, like, I don't exactly know what the language of it was, but in my mind, it's like, wow, you're willing to put your life on the line to have fun, but not even your mimetic life, your social media life on the line to have a conversation that might put you at the threat of even the death of your ego or your identity. And so it was kind of a moment of like, oh my gosh, like Charlie was willing to risk his actual life for bringing what was beautiful in his mind and his heart into the world. And so I actually do feel emboldened. It's not like I've got some flag that I'm going to start waving that this is the thing that I believe in that you all need to believe in. If it's anything, it's in, I don't even want to put a word on it, but there's just, I guess the closest word would be love, being loving,
Mm.
loving kindness. So yeah, I guess, so what's the question in this really? I mean, you've been so close to so many people who have faced assassination. Yeah. I don't know, Diana, maybe I don't know what the consideration is of whether she was assassinated or not, but it's certainly not a clean situation and how she was taken, right? Like, how do you make sense of being in this world and having a voice? I'm kind of stumbling over the question, but I guess what I'm trying to figure out for myself is like, how do I decide how loud to be, how much to use my signature note to meet the world when the consequences are possibly what they are, whether it's a mimetic cancellation or a biological death. How do we know how far to go? I mean, for me, finding my signature note more and more is directly connected with being more in the firing line.
Mm.
The more I find my signature note, the more there are people that are paying attention and the more
Mm.
chances there are for that evisceration. I've had that happen on a smaller scale, nothing like that. Nothing. Well, I have been actually, I forgot about that. I have been physically attacked once, just to give one more piece of the story. Wow, I forgot about that. And maybe this is a little bit of why there's a hesitancy because it just did happen. When I was younger, 15 years ago and living in London, I was a performing magician doing magic in Covent Garden sometimes. And I discovered this community that had emerged around for men about picking up women. And so there was a book written called The Game, and it was teaching these guys who were kind of socially awkward men techniques to basically like deceive women to get them in bed. And that wasn't my context. I had a comfortable relationship with women and so I didn't really feel that made sense to me. And so I started offering workshops with a woman I was dating at the time, who is now my wife, through a completely different paradigm, which was we were talking that was called The Magnetic Man: Attract Women Through Greatness. And we basically taught guys to stop thinking in a linear fashion, to just think about being in the world. And we taught them to, instead of trying to get something from a woman, singular, what can you give to all women, plural? And we taught them to come from a place of creating a sense of safety for women, creating a sense that women are beautiful, just what can you contribute, and just live as a force of that. And then the emergent result of that, of course, is that women are asking them for their phone number and they're going on dates, and it was beautiful, and guys ended up getting married and things. But at that time, there was a woman that I met who knew about the work that I was doing, who, like, in hindsight, I didn't know this was happening, but systematically sought me out and pretended to be my friend to get in person with me. We went out somewhere so that she could physically attack me, because she had the story that I wasn't doing what I was doing, but I was part of that whole community that I was literally designing a program to be the antithesis of. And so it's almost like the depth of my intention to be the antithesis of that thing that in my worldview, was more of a dark path, actually drew physical attack. She punched me in the face. I didn't see it coming, didn't even duck. I just looked and then threw a lit candle at me and then smashed a glass on me. And then the bouncers like took her out of this club and it was wild. I was just standing there in shock. Like, how did that just happen? And why did that happen? Why? It was so confusing because I'm trying so much to be this other thing. And so as I say that, I wonder if it's trying to be the opposite that did it or what, but like no matter what, there's that deep fear that in me, if I stand up and have a big voice and I take a stand for something again, like violence is part of what you meet.
Well, this is what we learn through this experience of this week, because we're recording in the week of Charlie Kirk's.
Yes.
That for example, I wrote poetically, when you silence a man by tearing out his tongue, which effectively is what the assassination was, you are proving nothing. You're simply telling the world that you fear what he may say. And she was fearful of what you were saying. So you triggered her on a very deep psychological level
Mm.
to expunge whatever she was feeling. It's just unfortunate you got hurt.
Yeah.
But this is the path of the sacred warrior. This is what we
Mm.
do. Does it stop us? Well, what's the alternative? That you never, ever have the courage to speak the truth, that you never, ever uphold essential principles so that every cell in your body is stimulated with such ripples of hope. That's the alternative, that you
Mm.
become locked within a constipated reality. That's not JP. That's not you. That's
Mm.
not you. It's not
Mm.
me. I mean, I spent the first 24 years of my life being oppressed by the patriarchy, which is principally upheld by my dear dad,
Hmm.
who was just fearful, I now know, of who I was and what I was, because I was always doing something different from what he wanted. I was not following in his footsteps. I'm the youngest as well. I have a brother who's a year and a half older, who is still contorted, even though we're these mature men in our 70s, who's still contorted by a rage that filled him from our father, but
Mm.
suppressed his rage until, he took it out on us by getting the strap out and hitting us. But it was more to do with the consistent disacknowledgement. And so that becomes a huge question in our lives. And as a
Mm.
kid, as a young man, I was always being hit. I was always being mugged. These aren't my teeth, they were all kicked out.
Mm.
Until I reached a point where I recognized you've really got to become more defined in your stance. Unfortunately, I'm born under the sign of the bull. So I realized that my horns needed to come out. Not that I was going to inflict any pain on anybody, but I needed to show the determination, the emphatic degree of what my own self-survival process was going to be about. And it was really another, because I did it through grace, it was nearly another gentle, gentle, easy, easy. And it diminished whatever was happening around me.
Mm.
But it took many violent blows and many mugging situations to
Mm.
actually understand that. So you wouldn't live the alternative. You wouldn't be happy because you wouldn't be doing
It's
what you're
true.
doing right.
Yeah.
And what we need to do is keep dreaming. What do I want? I want greater
Hmm.
joy. I want greater well-being. I want
Mm.
greater experience. I want greater adventure. I want loving people around me. I want. And I believe the universe is saying, keep going. This sounds really cool. This is what the universe is based on. What you want, the universe wants also.
Yeah, I have that same relationship to the universe is expanding and I am the universe. And so I experience that expansion as my ongoing desire for more, which, I have an event coming up called American Shadow, which is, an investigation into the collective shadow of us in America. And I think it involves a lot of the West. And some of that is the shame for wanting more. Because like I've become, especially like being outside of the country and seeing that with the constant more, bigger, bigger, bigger of America creates in shadow, like the dark side of that. having that conscious awareness creates that kind of meta shame where it's like, now I do want more, and that's actually my innate expression and being, and I'm ashamed for it. So it's like, as I can meet that and be free with that, then I can re-engage in that expansion and be free to create at a higher level. And I do believe what you're saying too, that like my expansion, my creation of more in whatever realm, material, relationally, financially, is the way that the universe expands. It's not just planets and moons, right? And suns and stars. It's also human beings and BMWs and fine dining and, traveling around the world and giving my kids great education. All of these things are expressions of that same expansive spirit. And I do believe that when I'm being that way, and to use the words of our common friend Charles Eisenstein, I'm creating a more beautiful world. It's the one that I see as possible, and it's, I think it's the highest contribution. You know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah.
So, so you're already doing it, aren't you?
I guess so. I
And my
have this
first,
sense that there's more volume. Like I feel like I'm at a 6 or a 6.5, to use a kind
well,
of
yeah,
a sound metaphor.
absolutely, and that I believe that keeps going. Or I mean,
Doesn't stop at 10.
I'm
Yeah.
rediscovering myself every decade.
Yeah.
Certainly not doing anything that I was doing 50 years ago.
Right.
Doing something completely different. But I'm still fundamentally who I am. It's just that there is more of me being expressed. So the the project itself is just one of the most noble things
Mm,
that I've heard recently, what you're intending. You're moving forward as a sacred warrior. But of course, the interesting thing is, as you well know, you need to prepare yourself because you're moving into danger zone.
yeah.
And that's good. What do I mean by that? Let's take away good and bad, but this is really, really positive. This is really appropriate because we know that when we move into danger zone, all we need to do is to calculate all our risks, and we live life dangerously and we always gain infinite abundance. But if we
Hmm.
don't calculate our risks, we get hurt.
Yes.
And that's really the whole substance of what great mountain climbers do. I
Yes.
remember Ranulph Fiennes once, and he'd climbed Everest 3 times.
Right.
And so, it was after a great, wonderful oratory
Wow.
that he'd given, or presentation that he'd given about climbing Everest. And I said, surely once was enough. Why did you have to do it twice? And he
Mm,
said, I'm not a religious man. And I
hmm.
said, good. But what are you going to say? What he was going to say, which is, but there's something up there.
Yes.
And I said, what is that something? And he said, well, I'm not a religious man. I said, good, talk about your spirit.
Mm,
Essentially, I felt myself at one with the universe. And that's
hmm.
why I keep going. Because I want, it comes in a moment of wonder and a moment of
Hmm. Hmm.
exhilaration, where all of that serotonin is released, and maybe even oxytocin is released within our bodies, even though you're at high altitudes where your
Hmm.
oxygen supply is severely affected. That he calculated all of his risks and he savored,
Yeah.
he saw the face of God.
Wow, that's so cool. Calculated risks. And to go back to paragliding, this is actually because I've been really looking into like, am I having a midlife crisis or something? Why am I doing this? But so there's the part of it where like it just, I'm flying. I don't know if you've ever been paragliding, but it's like the closest thing to being a bird. I mean, I am literally flying on thermals going up thousands of feet in the air, and I can turn right, turn left, and I'm flying. I'm not inside of a plane, I'm just flying. And so this sense of freedom and flight is beautiful and wondrous. And the other aspect of it that I'm realizing is like really an important part for me in my growth right now is it creates an opportunity for me to do something where there is a high consequentiality if I get it wrong. And it requires me to be assessing the risks and making calculated risks. So perfect example, I go up the other day, I do one flight and the clouds are starting to come in, and it's that point. Is it safe to go or is it not? Right. And it's like, if in that moment I'm sloppy and I'm not calculated, those are the moments, those are the kinds of decisions that lead to paragliding accidents and deaths. But if you can, so it's a relationship between the wind and the weather, aka spirit, right? And your being. And it's a
Yeah.
dance. And if you are response able and you make and you take calculated risks and you make decisions that are in partnership with the weather and the wind, you will fly decades, thousands and thousands of flights and never have an accident. And I know pilots like that. And if not, you could end up dead in your first few weeks
Yeah.
because you're not respecting Mother Nature and Gaia and all that. And so yeah, I feel like there is some kind of like deeper level to my paragliding right now where it's like a growth in my trust that I can make calculated risks and I can take that step forward into, places and realms that are dangerous, and I can trust myself. In fact, I decided not to fly that second flight, just packed things back, came back down the mountain in the car. And as a result, I trusted myself more. I
Uh-huh.
had more trust that I was capable of making calculated risks and moving and doing this thing called paragliding in a safe way.
Yeah.
Brilliant,
Mm.
brilliant. Brilliant. I mean, what an extraordinary story. And it feeds the richness of who you are, and, particularly in the dissemination of information. I mean, there are so many significant points that arise in my consciousness when you tell the story of being at one with the air, the
Mm.
spirit of the air, in the way that, we learn how to manage our lives. The difficulty is that we're often taught how to try and control life, and then things go wrong. You can't control a horse when you're riding a horse, but you can manage horse. And apparently, having spoken to a number of surfers in Los Angeles, you can't control the wave, but you can manage it. And they
Right.
believe that the spirit of the wave and the spirit of the air and the spirit of the water come together in that
Hmm.
moment. It's at one. And that's where the sweet spot is. That's where
Yeah.
extraordinary ride takes place.
Yeah. I have a beautiful metaphor. There's a philosophy or called the three principles, and they talk about like your thoughts are just like waves arising on the ocean, and so you are not your thoughts. And I think that's beautiful. And I was like, my physics background was like, well, how are waves produced? And I researched it and remembered it's like, oh yeah, it's the currents in the ocean meeting the wind on the surface, and the combination of the two are what produce the waves. And
Yeah.
so for me, that what's beautiful about that is like the waves of thought that arise are literally like the currents of our deep being,
Mm,
our identity, our beliefs about who we are, meeting the winds of circumstance. A phone
Mm.
rings, somebody says something, out there in the world, and like the wave, the thought, the thinking that we had emerges from the meeting of those two things. And so a lot of my life's work is attending to what are the currents beneath the surface. I have a lot of Jungian dreams of being in the water, or underwater. What's going on down there? Who am I? Who am I really? And as I
Mm.
come to know that, yeah, the water sense, the waves that arise as thought tend to be calmer.
So you see, this is really beautiful in terms of coming full circle where we started our conversation. Because at the moment, the waters are murky, but they're moving. The
Hmm.
archetypal waters within our consciousness, individually and collectively, are moving. And we know that something seismic, mixing metaphors, but you know what I mean, something
Yes.
huge fountain burst forth within human psyche this week with Charlie Kirk's.
Yes.
It's interesting his last name is Kirk, isn't it? Which is that Gaelic word for church.
Is it? Okay.
But that somewhere within him there was a sacred space, which is the nature of his chosen oneness, which was very illuminated. And so it detonated something within the collective consciousness. And it hasn't finished. It's
No.
still moving. The waters are still
Right.
moving. The question is, are we in flow or are we creating a tsunami? Now,
Hmm.
because of the intensity of projected consciousness into the world, where there is so much disharmony, so much anger, so much distrust, so much I don't believe in a be the change you want to be, whatever it may be. That what's going to happen is it's going to formulate itself into a tsunami, and that is going to crash against whatever psychological gestalt has been created that needs to be broken down. This is the wonder of what Mother Earth can give us. I hope if that happens, I don't wish to be too prophetic, but I hope that when that happens, that we have calculated our risks so we know to go with the flow.
Yes.
rather than to try and resist. And well, let's just see, because there is something remarkable in human nature, absolutely remarkable. And it's like these moments when, I've heard this repeatedly from senior officers, mostly in the British Army, but one or two in the IDF as well in Israel, that when a flare is lit, often in darkness, that suddenly, for a short period of time, you see everything
Mm.
start to, and then suddenly it goes dark again. And it feels that with this bright light being extinguished, that we're seeing the underbelly of human consciousness. And a lot of it is, as we've said, quite ugly, horrific.
Mm. Mm.
But that's not a judgment, that's a discernment, that's
Mhm.
perception. What you and I are interested in is how can we change that? How can
Yeah.
we be the change you want to see? How can we alter that? How can we heal that?
Mhm.
Healing the movement back to wholeness so that we become less fearful of the demons that exist within our unconscious.
Mhm.
Firstly, what we need to do is to name them. We have to identify them. And when we've identified them, we have power over them.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. On the individual level and the collective level. You mean that, right?
Oh,
Yes.
totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. What
Yeah.
is macro is also micro. What is micro is macro.
Yeah.
So it was very interesting that when I heard about Charlie and somebody in his administration called me and said, I think Charlie would have wanted you to know this, which was, I was very touched by that because
Mm.
we didn't spend a lot of time together, but we had a very unique encounter. And I said, thank you very much. Is there anything I can do, particularly for Charlie's wife? Then just, bring me into the conversation. And so I was so moved by her tears and by
Mm.
thinking of the bitterness that she must have been experiencing, the rawness of what
Of
she must
course.
have been experiencing, because they were there in the audience watching him being slaughtered.
Oh, I didn't know they were there.
Uh,
Fuck, I know.
They were there, and the two young children were there, the two young girls. So they were well looked after by
Mm.
attendant loves that came in. And, it's interesting seeing J.D. Vance and his wife being so loving and
Mm.
protective. It released a huge force. However, the point that I wanted to make was that what was the point I was going to make? I got so caught up in the emotion that I
Me
lost
too. I'm ready to cry. Yeah.
the oh, yes. So I decided that I would write a requiescat in pace, which I
Hmm.
did. I put it on social media. And it was very gentle and very loving and wishing to open a field of compassion. And it was denigrated from such a height with all of the psychological techniques that are used of shaming me. I will
Mm.
never follow your work again. I've always respected you, etc., etc. And so I sat with it for a bit in both communities, in the open public domain and also in the healing community. I was receiving the
Hmm.
same. And I thought, well, this is really not achieving the ends that I was hoping to achieve. So I removed it. I deleted
Yeah.
it from media and then
Yeah.
immediately wrote the same thing, but metaphorically speaking,
Sure.
and engaged in poetry. And that was accepted.
Yeah.
So you see the teaching
It
there
sneaks
from
past identity, doesn't it? The art.
it's moved past identity.
Yeah.
So it's no longer to do with ownership. It's no longer to do with what are you being? It's
Mm.
to do with that deeper place within human
Hmm.
consciousness where we move into the psyche, we move into that deep, deep, deep part where there is a metaphoric consciousness that lives. I've been having conversations with a number of senior people whose names I can't mention about the Gaza conflict. And I've been dreaming this into existence. So it's very interesting because they're very grounded, very
Hmm.
ordinary people who happen to have a certain set of brilliance about them that
Yes.
brings them into the capacity of what that power is all about. And I've said to each and every one of them, what do you feel the resolution of this conflict will be?
Mm.
And their volition has led to the same, this is individually, not collectively, the same thing. Supernatural aid will bring about a resolution. So it's there dreaming the same space into creation of opening up the wonderment of what the human capacity is all about in a
Mhm.
deep, metaphoric way, rather than this cerebral consciousness of the pixelation of opinionation.
Yeah.
Opinions, 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 whether they're worthy or not, people feel the right to express their opinions. Something else is taking place. So, in this breath of this moment, I put a lot of joy and love into that
Mm.
idea to
Mm.
see what.
So are you saying that like, or what you hear in that is that their not collective belief, but their individual beliefs that are all aligned that the supernatural aid is what's going to bring this to resolution is a kind of surrender and opening to something greater and maybe somehow related to a willingness to look at their own shadow and to wake up to something deeper. Is that
Yeah.
kind of what you're pointing to? Yeah. So that's a
Because
joyous thought.
we're
Yeah.
constantly talking about the shadow, we're constantly talking about the darkness,
Right.
we're
Right.
constantly talking about the nefarious aspect of the human psyche,
Right.
which is horrific. You know, there's a wonderful line in A Course in Miracles which says that the ego is suspicious at least and vicious at worst.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
if it is cornered, and I'm not talking about the ego as being a composite of all our negativity. I believe that the ego, offered by Carl Jung, is a way of defining healthy selfhood. The
Right.
difficulty is that we're not very healthy and we have
Right.
little understanding of our selfhood. So what happens is that the ego becomes contorted and it
Hmm.
wants control. And it will control in all sorts of nefarious means. The ego is suspicious at least and vicious at worst. And so there will be a healing of all of that when we bring ourselves into the light, when we
Hmm.
bring ourselves into the virtues that we human beings can live and disseminate as
Hmm.
being remarkable qualities to
Hmm.
heal
Hmm.
the entire situation. This
Hmm.
is what we're looking for because where today do we see the enlightened leaders
Yes.
on the world stage within the political or within the hegemony of the corporatocracy? And it's difficult to see enlightened leaders.
This is what I was just going to ask about. I was going to ask, how do you see? Because I'm trying to see, and sometimes I think I'm seeing, and then I'm not, and sometimes I'm not, but I missed it. You know, I mean, is it as simple as it takes one to know one, and then it's a reflection of my own capacity for growth and enlightenment, or is there a secret to it, or is it all projection? Like, how do we? Is it really something we can see, or do we just use that as a story so that we kind of are forced to kind of create our own enlightenment?
Yes and no. I
Yes
believe
and
both
no.
are
Okay.
really significant. Just because we don't see them doesn't mean to say that they aren't there
Fair.
fermenting.
Sure.
And
Sure.
I believe that they are fermenting. I have peeled eyes. I have very, very open eyes.
Yes, you do.
So, and I'm in this situation where people reach out to me, and often it's through word of mouth. And they often, because it's through word of mouth, they're often quite mighty. They're often
Hmm.
quite significant in the world. So they have
Hmm.
world roles. They are
Hmm.
the change makers and the thought
Hmm.
bringers. And there are a number that I'm seeing. Many of them are journalists,
Mm.
both men and women, and they're talking about the eruption of the horror as being a denial of Western enlightenment. So they're espousing the virtues of Western enlightenment to remind us what it is. And right at the core of it is the sanctity of the human being. They speak this, even though a number of them are agnostic. They
Mm.
speak this. So there is a great belief in their review of the world, because there they are in the capacity of writing reportage on what's going on in the world in its multifarious capacity, most of it rather dark at the
Mm,
moment. But that's also to do with the attention that their own lens is being placed on how do I bring about change in this? How do I bring about the exhumation of truth in this
mm,
situation? But there are so many ideas floating around. And as we see, truth and falsehood are really up for grabs today because
mhm,
there are so many young people that believe themselves to be women when they're really men, and
mm,
men when they're really women,
mhm,
etc. So there's a great deal of confusion over
mm,
that,
mm.
which is my heart goes out to the complexity of their inner struggle, but at the same time, it's raising a very interesting question about the evolutionary nature of our sexuality and the way that we play
Yes.
role in sexuality.
Yes.
However, but they're upholding the instrument of truth to try and get to the quintessence that is there.
Mm,
So when we go into the quintessence, we realize that the substance of truth is not an opinion and it's not a perceptualization. It's actually an absolute that holds us, that holds the fiber and the fabric of our beings together, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. So it's interesting that this is rising in the way, for example, that during COVID,
mhm.
which was a very difficult experience for all of us, that there were certain people who stepped forward.
Right.
They were the late night show hosts, the
The
comics,
comics. Yes.
and they made us laugh about the whole thing. So we're going into the archetypal role of the divine
Right.
fool, who
Right.
is the truth seeker, who
Mhm.
always sees the truth when others don't, and they lampoon it, or they send it up, or they satire it, and we laugh. And then suddenly we come home to who we truly are, and so we become bolder and braver, and we have more courage.
Yeah, I thought of the comics when you were talking about your movement from the more direct post to the more poetic one, because the poetic, the art kind of slipped by the identity, the ego, and I think comedy has done another great thing for us in that, is it's allowed us to kind of confront it without it being so existentially devastating, and release some of that pressure. The enlightened leader is maybe maybe it's also the is that enlightened leader or not, is this idea that it's like you're 100% enlightened and perfect and always all the time versus, you know, you have a certain level of growth that you've created too. I'm just kind of catching that for myself in my question earlier.
Well,
So yeah.
we're beings that live time, and time is
Right.
inconsistent because
Right.
it switches on and switches off. Whenever we're thinking, we switch off and we switch off. The blinking, switching off, opening, switching on. And so this is where the inconsistency comes from, because we know that when we become focused, we attend to the intention, we can actually be immensely powerful, where we paraglide or climb
Mhm.
mountains, create babies, or function as enlightened leaders.
Yes.
So it's all fermenting, do you see?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the nature of the growth of enlightenment, when we go back into the cycles of history, we begin to see that there was an immense period in the 1700s where thought, the collective within society, brought about renowned thought that
Mhm.
enabled us to establish a series of ethics that were very ancient mores that had been taught throughout the Torah and
Mhm.
throughout the Quran and throughout the Gospels. These ancient ethics were being reinvented
Right.
and brought into the secular context of what that period of history was all about, to
Mhm.
remind us of who we essentially are. That's
Mhm.
why the document of the Constitution of the United States is so immaculate. It
Mhm.
reminds us of who we truly are. And all we
Mhm.
need to do is to go back to that and keep reading it because we're inconsistent. We switch
Yeah.
on and then we'll learn how to produce that light.
Yeah, that's it's interesting to for collectively to go back to the Constitution. It reminds me of like my practice of writing my I am statements in the morning, which are statements that are born in moments of really clear seeing in the wake of forgiveness or connection to something greater than me. And it's like in that moment of seeing the light, I can capture that in some form, record it, write it down, go through my day, kind of forget, then come back to it the next morning. It's like I am. So, and actually, right now I have a bracelet that says the word attention on it. You've said the word attention a few times. It's my theme this year is attention. And my first declaration I write every morning is I am the light of attention, because I kind of found that like right now, those are the words that most point to the essence of what I feel that I am. Like not the what in the sense of am I Republican or Democrat, but like the what beneath the who, like beneath even identity. And
Yes.
so ultimately, at my deepest experience of being, I feel that what I am is this capacity to direct attention. Like
Mm.
I am the torch that shines in a particular direction, and whatever I put, wherever I go with attention, I get more of that. And
Mm.
so when I remember that, like life is so simple. Am I having my attention on love or am I having it on fear? Whichever
Mm.
one it's on, I'm going to get more of. If I could
Mm.
just remember it, I wouldn't have to write it every morning and wear a bracelet and, these things. But like, that's what's giving
Well,
me faith right now.
I mean, it's brilliant. It's brilliant for all sorts of wonderful reasons. It's brilliant. But repetition is the mother of skill. It's
Yes.
again repeating, 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 because we are living time. If we weren't living time, then we're part of the eternal, all that is and shall
Hmm.
be. More. So, to move into that rather lofty level, using the I am is
Hmm.
using a code that has been taught by all the great spiritual teachers all over the
Yes.
world. The
Yes.
great I means that you're moving into the presence of the divine.
I
Um,
are.
it was, in our relative history, over 6,000 years ago, it was Moses who brought it to our attention.
Yeah,
Yeah, he,
exactly. Right. I was trying to remember how to say it, but yes. Yes. I am that I am. Yeah. And my work is my company name is We Are Creating, which is just the plural version of I am, we are. And which I also find to be a really powerful thing. Sometimes I go through periods of time where I'm writing we are instead of I am. It kind of invokes the same energy, but it kind of has me feel more connected and part of a collective when I speak it that way. But yeah, Stuart, I'm conscious of time and this has been a
yeah.
phenomenal conversation. It's late where you
Um,
are.
but also, somebody's about to walk into my
Ah,
apartment.
okay.
'Cause
Okay.
I have guests staying.
Wonderful.
They've been very good. They've stayed away and had dinner with friends, but I know they're going to get back in a few moments and they're going to walk in here. So I fear well, I'm not frightened, but I will have to say thank you. It's been wonderful seeing you
It has
again.
been. Yes.
Just chin wagging in this way, but in a very, 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 actually, that makes too light of it. It's more than a chin wag. It goes deep into the
Mm.
visceral aspect of who we are as human. And I thank you for that opportunity. So bless you.
Bless you
Um,
very much. Thank you.
We haven't talked a lot about the human voice, but I would love, if I may say,
Please mention it. I was going to, but yeah, go ahead. Tell us about it.
there is actually going to be a masterclass that I'm giving online, and
Hmm.
fortunately, they seem to draw. I'm just reaching for my diary just to make sure that I have the date right. Yeah, it's going to be on October the 5th. And so, whenever this wonderful podcast emerges between now and October the 5th, please, ladies and gentlemen, look at
Mm.
www.stewartpearce.com. And it's Stewartpearce. And you'll see an invitazione to this masterclass. Come along.
Lovely.
Very surprised. It's also an opportunity for people to share with me the issues that they have with presentation or relationship values that are not being completely clarified, with
Mhm.
the objective of how can we open our voices to become the noble, considerable, intelligent, and loving processes at their core they really are.
And the Sacred Warriors. Love it. Yeah,
Always.
wonderful. I'll include a link in the show notes.
That's you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. I'll see you soon.
Yeah. Namaste. Namaste.
Namaste.